In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create campaigns, ad groups, and ads via the TikTok Ads API. In this video, I'm going to be following the blog article that you can find on the Kitchen.io page. And in this case, we'll be going through multiple different examples to upload a video and image creative to TikTok, then create a campaign and ad group via the TikTok Ads API, and then lastly, use all of that information to create the TikTok ad. We will be needing a campaign and ad group in order to create an ad, and we'll need to have a video and a thumbnail image in order to create the creative part of the ad. So we'll go through this, and you don't have to read all of the text here. In my case, I'm going to be using a sandbox account. If you don't have an account on TikTok, that's quite a good idea to get one, because you can actually get started playing around with the API without needing to run any real ads. So in our case, what we need to do is we need to make an API call to this endpoint. So it is the file endpoint, file video ad upload endpoint. And we need to submit 4 different parameters. So we need to define the upload type. In our case, we're going to be uploading by URL. So this is going to be a video that is stored on Dropbox. And then we need to submit a unique file name and an advertiser ID. Of course, that's the account ID that we need to specify, so the TikTok or the TikTok Ads API knows where the video should be uploaded to. So let's just copy this over here and go to my Insomnia. So we can see that on Insomnia, I've already entered this particular information here. So we have our endpoint up above, then we have the advertiser ID upload type. And you can see that the file name and the video URL still show up as these variables. So let's make sure to replace them. For the video, I'm going to be using a Dropbox link. And if you've ever shared a Dropbox link, what you can do is you can change the DL equal to 0 at the end to DL equal to 1, and then use that as a media file link. So this is what I'm going to do. Instead here, I'm just going to replace my variable. And then I need to supply a name. So in this case, I'm just going to call it my YouTube demo video 123. Cool. So we need to make sure that this is a unique name. Otherwise, TikTok will throw an error. But let's try this out. So we can see it takes a second. This is to be expected because it is a quite large file of 20 megabytes or so. And as we can see, we get a response here. So we get a video ID back, and this video ID we will now use to create an image. So I'm just going to duplicate my request over here. I'm just going to say upload image creative. And ultimately the request is going to be pretty much the same. Right now we don't need to supply a video, but instead an image. And of course we need to give it a specific name and the URL. So in this case we want to supply an image URL, and just going to give it a name. Cool. So now let's make sure that we can actually use this image URL over here. So how do we do that? Well, it looks like we need to use this video ID to get a thumbnail, or what TikTok calls a poster, in order to use that to get an image ID. And let's take a look at the tutorial, the written tutorial, to see how we do that. So we're done with the video over here. And yeah, we got a response that looked very similar. So what we need to do now is we need to get the video ID information. So we need to get some more information about this particular video and supply it here. So you can see that the endpoint that we're asking for is still file video ad, and then we have info. So let's compare that to the one here. So we had file video ad upload. Now we need file video ad info. And then you can see that we need to supply the advertiser ID once more and the video ID. So the video ID now needs to be put into the URL. So I'm just going to copy the entire part over here, maybe without the get. So copy that part. And let's go back to Insomnia. and create one more request. So what we want to do is we want to get the video creative, information maybe. And what we need to do here is we need to do a get request. Just going to duplicate the request here. And of course, we don't need to supply a body at all because we're passing, with the get request, we're passing all of the information, all of the parameters via URL parameters and not via the body. So I'm just going to remove the body here. And what we need to now make sure is that we actually supply the correct video ID and also the correct advertiser ID. So I'm just going to do that right now. Take the advertiser ID from here. And then from the uploaded video, let's copy our video ID over here and paste that. And that should be it. So we should be now making a request to the video ad info endpoint. And as we can see, we have our YouTube demo video that we uploaded previously. And we can see that it was just uploaded. We have an ID. There is something about height and width. And here is the part that we need. So we have a poster URL. So maybe I can even open it. And yes, we can see that this is indeed a thumbnail image that we can use. So let's copy this URL over here. And with our image creative, we'll just supply the image URL like this. And I'm just going to upload that as well. And as we can see, this worked out fine. So now it's important to note down your video ID and your image ID because we'll be using these later on. So in our case, we need this ID over here. If you're using something like Insomnia or Postman, then of course you can look up these requests later on. So we have our image ID here, and then we have our video ID here. So let's go to the correct part. So now that we've created the video and the image, we need to create a campaign. Then with that campaign, we'll need to create an ad group. And then into that ad group, we'll create the ad, the final ad. And then we'll combine everything together to create the ad. So as you can see, the endpoint that we need to call here is very similar to what we've seen before. So we're using the campaign endpoint and using the create endpoint, the campaign create endpoint in particular. So I'm just going to copy this over here as well one more time. And let's duplicate our request from over here and say create campaign. And so what we need to change here is this endpoint so we can see campaign create. And let's take a look at the body that we need to supply. Just going to copy this below here so we can see that we still need to supply an advertiser ID. So I'm just going to replace this entire row over here because that's going to be the same one. And then we need to supply a budget. So this of course shouldn't say name. This is a mistake. So this should be a budget. So let's say 100. And I think I can supply it as a float. So this will be 100 euros in my case. And then we need a campaign name and call it My YouTube Demo Campaign. That's it. Let's take a look. As you can see, we're using a reach campaign, campaign objective, and we're using a daily budget. So daily budget of 100, and the objective type is reach. I'm using that right now because if we were using app install or conversions, which is totally possible to do, you would need to have a pixel, you would need to have an app maybe, and I don't have those available right now. So what we can see is now we have a campaign ID that got returned. For some reason, TikTok returns IDs oftentimes as integers instead of strings, which I'm not a big fan of, but we're going to go with the flow and just use this campaign ID over here. And let's now use the campaign ID to create an ad group. So I'm just going to duplicate this request over here. And I'm just going to guess that we just need to replace this to ad group. So instead of campaign create endpoint, we're using the ad group create endpoint. And of course we need to supply, we already know that we need to supply a campaign ID. So I'm just already going to enter this over here, and we have our advertiser ID as well. So just going to copy the campaign ID from here And because I'm rebellious, I'm going to use string. TikTok will typically accept it both as a string and an integer. I just think it's a bad idea to be supplying IDs as integers. We have a pacing, we have billing type, and because we're using a reach campaign objective, we also need to supply frequency and frequency schedule. So I'm just going to copy this over here, not the first two rows. Okay. Good. So we need to supply an ad group name. Let's just call it as before, my demo YouTube ad group. This ID, this location ID that I've specified here actually refers to the US, the country, the United States. And if you don't know where that comes from, let me fill you in. So there is a full list of all location IDs available on TikTok that you can find over here. So you can see that the United States responds to this ID. And then if you wanted to target individual states, maybe even cities, you could do that too. So let's just go back over here. We have a frequency of 2, frequency schedule of 3. This just basically defines how often an ad is allowed to be shown to one individual user. So let's create this, see if it works. Okay, so that makes sense. Start time cannot be earlier than the current time. Please edit the start time and try again. So today is the 9th of August. So let's start this one on the 10th of August and then end it on midnight of the new year. Okay, fantastic. So this worked too. We have an ad group ID now. So we'll use this one in a minute. So I'm just going to duplicate this request one more time and I'm just going to say create an ad. So this should now be the moment where we take the video ID, the image ID, and the ad group ID that we just created. We won't need the campaign ID, but of course, in order to create an ad group, we had to create the campaign first. So it still made sense to do it in this order. And again, the endpoint will just change slightly. We'll use the ad create endpoint. What we'll need to supply is an ad group ID. I already know that. And we'll need to supply an ad name. I also know that. So this is going to be my demo YouTube ad. We need to change the ad group here. And then let's take a look at all of the other parameters that we need to add here. Let me just take over the ad group. So what we can see here is that the ad name is actually supplied as part of the creative parameter or field. And the creatives field is actually a list of items. So I'm going to just copy this part over here and then add it to my insomnia part. So as we can see, this is not correct. Make sure this shows up correctly here. Okay, so what we can see here is that we have our advertiser ID and the ad group ID. The video ID we need to change, right? We need to take that from the actual previously created video that we did together in this demo tutorial. And then we need to give it a display name, ad copy, and name. So I'm going to say, hey, you buy my stuff. So this is going to be my ad copy, and then my ad name, as before, is going to be my YouTube demo ad. And the ad format, as we can see here, is single video. There are a bunch of different options that we can take. There are ways to include call to actions, etc., but we'll just use the minimum information needed to successfully create an ad. And then you can take a look at the official documentation to find out what other parameters you may want to add. In particular, right now, we're using something called a display name, which is kind of like a custom override of the profile or identity of the ad that will be running. So instead of using a TikTok profile that was previously created, TikTok account that was previously created, we'll just use a custom name. So in my case, I'm just going to use our company name, Kitchen.io, and that's it. So let's look up the video IDs and the image IDs and then give this a go. And that should be it. So let's run this, see if it works. And there we have it. It doesn't need an audit. So that's good to hear. Doesn't need an audit, created an ad. If I understand this correctly, maybe this is a way to actually create multiple ads at the same time. So let's try this out. So I'm gonna call this my video YouTube demo ad number 2 and number 3. Let's see if we can actually create multiple ads at the same time. And yeah, that seems to be the case. So that's great news. So it means that the ad creation by default is actually supported in batch or in bulk, which makes it even faster to create multiple ads at the same time if you want. Thanks for watching the video. If you followed from the very beginning to the very end, then well done. You're well on your way to creating all of your ads programmatically on TikTok.